Oh, we can always do it over again. I'm sure it'll be fun. So,
No. Cool. So I'm sitting here across the screen from Jake Knapp. Jake is one of the most influential product designers today. He created the design sprint process at Google. He's a best-selling author of two books that you actually can see behind me. And at least one of these books, the one that I have many copies of, is always here. It's not. It's always prominent like this.
not just because.
Right, not just because I'm talking to Jake. This one I actually turned sideways.
That's okay. That's okay.
So,
And if you're just listening to the audio, it's the Lord of the Rings that Aaron's pointing at.
oh yeah,
That's
actually,
my book. That's my book.
I do have Lord of the Rings right here too, but that's actually yeah, that's not necessarily related to Jake, but also related to Jake.
No, that's
in
my
some
other book,
strange way.
Sprint and Lord of the Rings. That's a lot
So
of people don't know
you
that about me.
are J.R.R. Tolkien. I was
Yeah,
wondering.
that's right. Yeah.
I was wondering who got to be that. Uh, cool. So, we have probably a ton of different things that we could talk about. But first I wanted to just thank you for being here and thank you for taking the time to talk to me. It's super cool. And I guess the first thing before I kind of dive into a more podcasty kind of interview is I wanted to ask, like, how are you doing these days? Like, what's like this is one of the craziest times in um, that I've seen, and probably a lot of people. So, what's the situation over there? I may not be fully up to speed,
Yeah.
and yeah,
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on. Thank you for putting up with we connected and I didn't even have my camera plugged in. I am notoriously just takes me a long time to get started doing everything. So I appreciate your patience. And that's a very thoughtful question for you to ask. I think that the reality is I'm doing okay. And I don't, I won't try to, you know, uh, sort of paint a picture of a high performing, just rolling with all the punches and capitalizing with new hustles and new business opportunities. And this is when things go crazy and get torn apart. There are opportunities there for sure,
hmm,
but like the reality is it's been a tough year, and I know it's been a tough year for a lot of people, definitely for me and my family. We've had some struggles with it. My son got what we think was COVID-19 and got really sick actually, and
well,
he's getting better now, but it's taken months for his lungs to recover, and there still has some challenges there, but getting better. Um, and school over video is it's tough for kids, it's isolating, and that's tough. And so I think it's the same issues everybody's dealing with, but they they definitely don't. I have not developed any great techniques for avoiding or like transcending those those problems that everybody's having.
no.
How about
Uh,
you? How are you holding up during all this?
um, I'm usually super jealous of people with families and kids and kind of a fuller life in some ways, um, but not during this time.
Yeah.
I have a large apartment all to myself. I started a couple of hobbies. One in particular right before COVID hit. I bought a violin just because I wanted to learn, and now I have all the time to practice. I still have meetings, but they're on Zoom, so I can, and there's food deliveries in Israel is actually, I don't want anybody to hate me who's in a tougher place, but Israel has been open more or less for a couple of months now. You
Oh
still wear
man.
masks, but I went to the pool today, to swim, and
Oh, wow.
yeah.
Wow.
Well,
Yeah.
it's mostly empty because the kids are in school now, so it's
Yeah.
but yeah, you can go to a restaurant, and they're doing it by city. So some cities are stricter if there's more cases, and I'm in one of the best cities to be in, so I'm luckily doing pretty well.
Well, great. Thanks. That's great to hear, Aaron. I'm really happy for you over there. That's wonderful. Where it was basically, you know, I describe to people who aren't in the United States who wonder what it's like. It's basically like Mad Max Fury Road here. Just like that's what it's like.
Yeah, no. So I mean, I think it's just. I mean, if it was just COVID, but there was more of an agreement on what's the right thing to do, and more of a kind of a harmony, and there wasn't, all the other stuff that are rolled into it. Um, so, you know, before kind of because I do want to. I mean, you're such an interesting person, and we will talk about all the other great stuff. But like, are you able to look at what's going on in the news and in the kind of in your surrounding? And I mean, I know there's probably demonstrations and a lot of chaos. And are you able to look at that and feel some optimism? How do you process the
Yeah,
situation?
it's easier to feel optimism when I pay less frequent attention to the news. Like the more I look at it, and I'm not gonna lie to you, like I find the news as fascinating as anybody, and I do read it. I read it more than I intend to. Um, the one thing that I am definitely able to avoid is watching news on TV. We don't have a TV, and that's a good like mental health thing for me because I love TV and I would just be watching it right now. I wouldn't even be talking to you, but no offense.
I'm not
But
TV. It's fine.
yeah, but even yeah, you're just not TV. So, but the but any news is designed to keep you hooked. It's designed to give you the
Yeah.
most outrageous thing that's going to like fire you up, and different news outlets over whether it's designed intentionally from the start or whether it's what evolves over time. They develop their niche, their market fit, and it's who can they outrage the most and fire up the most, because that's how they get attention. And it's not to say that the things you read in the news like aren't based in fact. Like they're all right, these things are going on, but they're selecting which things to amplify,
Sure.
sometimes for good. But if you pay attention to it all the time, and I fall in this trap. I've paid too much attention to it. So trying to monitor it all the time and be in this like alert mode and kind of this like danger mode all the time is really stressful. And it's been hard this year to stay out of that, because
Yeah.
sometimes the things really work. Like it did feel like we need to know what's going on.
Yeah.
Like certainly with COVID, there were times, especially in the beginning, there are times when like you really like need to know what's going on because it personally impacts your safety. And maybe today, like something you need to know about how you behave today, or you need to know the protests that have been happening here with Black Lives Matter. Like that's important stuff. It's important to be up to date on that.
Yeah.
And we had protests with I live in Seattle, and very close to us we had protests where there were tear gassing, and like I think you and I were emailing about this. Then they had they blocked off like part of the city or like a block or two, and the protesters kind of
Yeah.
set up camp in there for a while. And that's like I do need to know that because it's right down the street, and also I need to know because it's important. It's like an important thing. But yeah, it's like, to answer your question, it is possible if I'm following it every day, if I'm reading the news more than once a day, if I'm refreshing, it's hard to not just see the noise and not just feel the like fight or flight.
Hmm.
If I when you zoom out, you say, man, this is good. Like the the Black Lives Matter protests are really good because they have opened up a new era of conversation and debate about what we should be doing as a country. And I think that America has done so much wrong here. But I also know we're not the only country in the world that struggles with this. And a lot of people, America's a very visible country. So what happens here, people will see elsewhere, and it won't get solved like this month or this year, or like it's going to take a really long time. But anyway, that's you know, if you zoom out, if you imagine like the longer term horizon view of this, this is really good stuff that's happening, but it's very painful as it's
Yeah.
happening. And I think a lot of things will change post COVID, will be good things, but they're very painful right now. And that's not to say that like COVID's a good thing. Like it's horrible, but you know, there are things that will be good that will come out of it. I think it's cool that like you and I are having this conversation over video. And I mean, we've had video conversations before, like, but we're more likely to be able to do that, to have like, it'll be maybe easier for you and I to like maintain a friendship. And like, we live almost literally on like the opposite sides of the planet. And
Mm.
that's pretty cool, you know. And there are many opportunities there that I think are interesting. We've realized in our own lives as a family that like, well, maybe, you know, what really matters to us. Like I've been over the past few years traveling as much as I can to, while people are interested in design sprints, I want to teach it, I want to talk about it, and I love traveling, I love meeting people and doing that.
Mm.
But these last few months of where you can't do that, it's been interesting. It's made us kind of reassess, like, you know, how much do you really need to do that? What matters? I don't know. So I think there are good things going on in very painful ways. I guess
Yeah.
my summary of that.
Yeah. No, I feel very much the same way. I mean, I celebrated my 40th birthday at the time of the tightest quarantine in Israel.
Yeah.
And you know, that was, you know, kind of hard, but we ended up doing a Zoom party. Um, and I had my cousin who lives in London and some friends from America and some friends from Israel all meeting each other for the first time. So that was kind of,
Yeah.
you can kind
That's
of
cool,
enjoy
right?
that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But also I have this tendency to really see it's intellectualizing. So it's a way to defend from pain by saying um, every every progress in history has always come from a lot of chaos and pain,
Yeah.
and some of these things had to happen, and some of these things, um, specifically with Black Lives Matter, but and with police brutality, these are things that were there, and without and they had to explode and they had to change, and and in a way, you have to be grateful that it happens now and not in 50 years, or um, and and even with this is getting pretty political, which I don't necessarily mean to do, but even with like COVID and Trump, I bet a large part of the American population understands why it's important that the president is smarter than you. Like that it's an important qualification,
Yeah.
because I've met people. I mean, I was actually uh, in America for a few months during the end of the campaign, Trump's campaign. So
Yeah.
I talked to people, and a lot of people said because he's not. They like him because he doesn't. He's not talking like a politician, and he's like he's like us. And part
Yeah.
of me is like, you
Yeah.
don't want someone like you. You're an
Yeah.
idiot, and I'm an idiot. He's way smarter than us, who speaks very carefully, is not very candid, because he thinks about the implication of his words on, global markets or something. That's who you want.
It is an interesting. That's an interesting thing, though. That, and I don't know how much. Like, I don't know how much that's American, like culturally, but we very highly value, uh, like being like plain spoken. That's like super highly valued here, I think. And like it can, and I actually think it can be a mark of someone who is very smart. Like, sometimes in order to be able to talk about things that are complex in plain language,
Hmm.
that's very difficult to do. You can talk in plain, like anybody can talk in plain language, like be stupid,
Yeah.
but it's actually hard to talk about complicated things and make them feel, and make them simple.
Yeah.
And that's, there's certainly, those are the kinds of scientists and leaders who I think we admire them the most. But I do think that the I don't think the future here holds more presidents, who more leaders in general, let's say, who speak in very sophisticated ways. I think it holds, I hope it holds people who are plain spoken and charismatic and friendly, who are also very principled and very bright. But I think given the choice, we will choose the person who you'd most like to hang out with,
Yeah.
and that's like, I think you can go back like many elections, and you'd see that that's the person who won. Probably, I mean, definitely, like, uh, I mean, if just we could just go back to like Trump versus Clinton. Yeah, like he just like seems like more of like a sort of a regular guy. Like, it's not to say there aren't, like, there are all these other dynamics, but I mean, just if you like simplify down to one thing, like, it seems like this is true.
Hmm.
Like, he just seems like, I guess he seems like, to more people, he seems like more of a regular guy. Not everyone would agree, but like to more people, he seems like more of like, I guess he's like a nice guy. I think Obama versus Romney, or Obama versus McCain, like, Obama seems like kind of nice, and Obama's very, like, he is that kind of,
Professorial. Yeah.
yes, like he definitely speaks very intelligently, but he also does sort of the low key thing. So he has like those like two modes,
Yeah.
whereas some, like, I don't think all candidates really can do both modes, and I think you really only have to be able to do the low key one. So if you go back to George W. Bush, like,
Yeah.
he just did the plain spoken mode, really well. And then you go back to Clinton, definitely better than the folks he went up against, Bob Dole and George H.W. Bush. He was definitely more charismatic. From you go back, and then like George H.W. Bush versus Dukakis was the one before that, and Dukakis was really like kind of, I guess, not that charismatic. So George H.W. Bush was not super charismatic, but then before that, Reagan, like,
Hmm.
super. Anyway, we could go
Yeah.
back, but
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that's a thing. Like, that makes a huge difference if you just sound like a normal person. And I don't know, is that like in Israel? Is that the case? Like, how much does that matter?
Um, I don't know. I mean, I think um, there's a word that is a big part of the vocabulary, which is dugli. I think it comes from Arabic, but it means like speak plain, like speak
Yeah,
the
yeah,
brutal, honest truth. Um, uh, and um, and so we expect that from all the leaders, but we also, I I think by and large everyone agrees that whoever's the prime minister has to be smart, like smarter
yeah,
than us, like
yeah.
like capable of managing very complex systems.
Right. Yeah. Well, and the prime minister too, though, I mean, you have, they're elected by the parliament, right? It's not a direct election for the prime minister.
It was for a while, but no, it's a parliamentary system.
Okay.
um, but effectively, the two largest parties are competing for the prime ministership, right? And so,
Right. Like,
and
it's hard
many,
to imagine here
yeah,
that Trump gets elected if it's parliamentary. Like, if it's,
yeah,
if, like, he would not, if we had a prime minister instead of a president, I don't think he gets elected,
yeah,
because he wasn't playing, he wouldn't have sort of built a coalition or anything.
yeah.
um But
Which
yeah,
is part of the intelligence that you need, and why Netanyahu, is seen by many as unbeatable, is because he can form these coalitions and make them work somehow and make
yeah,
deals and it
yeah,
takes a
yeah,
lot of intelligence and social intelligence and manipulation and a little bit of corruption probably,
yeah, yeah.
um, to even make that work. Okay, let's put politics aside. I
Okay,
think
okay,
I could
sure.
talk to you all day about this, but and I do think it's a design conversation. Actually, I do think
Well, it
that
is, and I mean it's related to it's definitely related to consulting and building products and business
no,
because the same factors are at play. They're just so like they're on this weird stage in politics. But
yeah.
yeah.
Someone asked me who is the most impactful designer of all time, and I said Montesquieu, who's the French philosopher who invented the separation of powers into executive, judicial, and
Oh.
legislative. That's a
Oh man.
design. That's a
Yeah,
design.
it's a design decision. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good answer.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I wish people thought about design, and sometimes um, this is not going at all according to plan. But whatever. Sometimes I wish people kind of saw design in this broader way. Uh, and so when sometimes I hear you say, okay, it's called design sprint, but it's not just design, it's business and strategy, and I'm like, but
Yeah.
that's what design is, right? Like, I
Yeah.
wish people,
Yeah.
I want to reclaim the word design and say design is much much bigger than you think, than what most
Yeah.
people think, right?
Yeah. The problem is that for every effort to reclaim it, there's so much there's so much like design is creativity like BS being like pumped out of other pipes. Like
Yeah,
you can't pump enough. Design is just problem solving. Design is like, the separation of powers. Like you need the biggest pipe ever to like pump that out to change the definition of design because there's so many other pipes pumping out like just like rainbow colored like goo that's just like, oh, let's I don't
rainbow
know, like
colored goo. I like that. And like I know exactly what you're talking about. Like it's
yeah.
such a good picture. It's like social media, like, oh, look what we can do in Figma, like
Yeah, I mean, that's which is fine, like it's all fine, and I think it's where it's frustrating is when you're like, man, this way of looking at things or this way of like breaking things down, it's so much better than the default way that things happen, like this more like structured way or like this intentional way, and
Yeah,
saying like, wait a second, the way that we do X, it could be better, and let's consider a new structure for it. Let's redesign that thing. And
yeah,
when you're on that edge of like looking at everything through this context of like design, and you just want to like solve it in the most practical pragmatic way, it's so frustrating
yeah,
for people to try, to put you into like a design like, oh no, you're in this like cube, like you do this little part at the end or whatever.
yeah,
It's so frustrating and aggravating, and so yeah, so it sucks, but I guess we just i I think it's maybe actually easier to like explain what you do in a different way, and
yeah,
try not
yeah.
to use design. We tried to,
I,
like
I,
in the
I
book
can,
Sprint, there's like very few mentions of the word design
yeah,
because I think that's like it's probably like a losing battle to redefine it, or it's going to take a super long time.
yeah. So I respect that. I don't think I'm gonna go that path because and it's all semantics. Like, who cares? It's just a word.
Yeah.
So from that point, I kind of
Well,
whatever.
it's a very
But
powerful word, though. I mean,
yeah,
it is like very powerful because the idea is like you're you're intentionally setting out a plan for how things should go, and that's I don't know of another word besides design that that really does says that.
and the best definition I read of design that is starting to really shape my thinking is design is just um, nonverbal thinking. It's 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 a kind of thinking that's more visual and richer than words, and that connects to with me so much with like also systems thinking and thinking about complexity and thinking about and problem solving when you're doing this not from a place of like let me talk about this and let me throw words at
Yeah.
this, but
Yeah.
let me
Yeah.
model this massive thing with all of its interrelationship and try to understand it and try to understand where the levers are. um, and is it levers or levers or
Well, it probably depends. I say lever,
okay,
but it's probably lever in like more, the United Kingdom or something. I
okay,
don't know.
okay. Good. So I didn't just ask. I didn't. I wasn't just.
And it
Okay.
wouldn't be like, it's not an embarrassing one anyway. It's not
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
it
Yeah.
doesn't sound super pretentious
Right.
to
Okay.
say
Good.
lever.
Good. Um, okay. So I have a big question.
Okay.
Um, but before the big question, I want to ask a small question. The small
Okay.
question is, did you get your remarkable? And what do you?
No,
You
I haven't
didn't?
gotten it yet. No,
Oh,
I mean,
that's
well, I ordered it,
okay.
but they keep pushing back the ship date. So I ordered the Remarkable 2,
Yeah.
the new one,
Yeah.
back in. I mean, it was a while ago,
Yeah.
and I am in batch 3, and I don't even think batch 1 has shipped yet.
Mm.
So, like, originally, I should have gotten it in August, but now they say like late October, I think.
Oh no.
Which is, I mean, I get
Should
it,
have gotten the
COVID, and
one, man. The one
I
is so
know. Look,
good.
you're holding. Yeah, I
Okay.
know. I know. I should
Uh,
have. Well,
anyway, so now to the big question. So, um,
the big question is, what do you think of your Remarkable?
yeah, exactly.
Oh,
It's the whole thing,
yeah.
the whole episode.
We'll just stop the podcast here.
Um, I would. So what I was. So I started a couple of episodes with this question, and it could be. Um, it could be a little bit unnatural, but I think it makes a lot of sense to ask. So, obviously, you wrote Sprint and you do, make time and you're doing all these amazing things. But I think it's worthwhile to go back a little bit, kind of like a Krista Tippett kind of episode, and and say, what's something that you've believed since childhood, since a fairly early age, that is still driving you today? Something that's
Oh.
really part of your journey throughout all of this. And if you need to take your time, think about it. Take your time. But
Well, I think I can think of sort of roughly what it is, and then the question is if like I can explain it. But um, I was just visiting my childhood home, actually. Like yesterday, I was there yesterday, and we were there for a few days. I grew up on this island that is like kind of right on the edge. It's in the United States, but it's right on the edge of Canada. There are these little islands up in Washington State,
cool.
and I grew up on like a farm, and so I spent a lot of time these last few days like out in the fields, walking around with my by myself or with my boys or whatever, and um, so it's like it's when you go back to a place where you were as a kid, right? Like it's very powerful. Like all the kid like brain modes kind of come back, and I definitely feel that really strongly there. And we're staying in like my childhood bedroom, and like I have like really really powerful memories. So this thing that is kind of especially magic for me about being there is this idea of like possibility, like this feeling of like being a kid, um and like I was in the field with my younger son, and we've been playing lately. I convinced him to play these games. They're like Dungeons and Dragons board games. So my younger son is 9, and I don't even really know how to play. I've played like real Dungeons and Dragons like twice in my life maybe, but I don't like, and I don't really know. I wouldn't know how to do it. Like I wouldn't know how to like set it up and do real Dungeons and Dragons with my family, but is assuming they would do it, which they probably wouldn't. But I have managed to get him to play but it, for me it's like a really powerful, like I did play it as a kid and I had like the books and I was like wanting to play and like
Yeah.
reading all about it, and it became this powerful, like this thing, this idea of like the possibility, or like the, you know, the all the things you could imagine or create, this idea of like creating a world, creating the rules, like you know, all these things that happen.
Connects with Tolkien.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And it was just so, there was so much powerful, like, I don't know, like magic there. There's like a lot of like brain energy that's really exciting about that. And I've been, like I said, lately here at home in Seattle, we've been playing this board game, and the best one we've gotten so far is called Tomb of Annihilation, and it's based on Tomb of Horrors, which is referenced in Ready Player One, which is an old dungeon from Dungeons and Dragons. Anyway, so it's getting super nerdy. Sorry, you just lost. All viewers are now gone.
On board.
So Tomb of Annihilation, it is like their updated version of Tomb of Horrors. I think you can do it as like a regular dungeon, but they also have this box game, and it's not the best designed board game, the way they do these board games. It was pretty good. It has these little miniatures of the monsters and like your characters and stuff, and we have a good time. So we've been playing that, and anyway, we were out in the field, and like we were like, okay, I was remembering how when I was a kid, one of the most fun things was to like go through the woods or go through the field and like carry a stick and like imagine that, you know, we're in space and we're having like, we're like, you know, like got like, you know, like sort of laser guns or something, or or I'm like, you know, it's like a dungeony Dungeons and Dragons kind of thing, whatever. I've got a sword, whatever. Like that stuff it's like a Middle Earth kind of a thing. That was so fun to like be in the space and just like pretend. And so I got my son into it, and we were like, you know, like picking up different sticks. I'm like, this stick is, you know, it's like a fire sword. This stick can shoot, you know, like can shoot magic arrows or whatever. Like, and then like we go up to like these dead trees and like smash them with it was just, you know, we had a great time. But the essence of that, the essence behind that magic of being a kid, it's like creating something that isn't there. It's like it's sort of it's just sort of like making something, and in a way that's when I come alive the most, is when I'm making something. And I did so many projects making things as a kid, and give a lot of credit to my mom for this, because she really fostered and encouraged like either whatever I was into, like if I was into certain kind of books, like she would read them aloud to me like tirelessly. Or if, you know, I was into like castles, and she like got this book and we made a castle together out of like cardboard and paper and like glue and you know, like whatever the thing was, she was, you know, I would make up these stories and I'd record them on like a little like voice recorder with a little tape.
I did the same thing. It's so
really
fun.
yeah. And my mom would type them up like so then I could see like, oh, this is the book, like this is the story. And and then eventually I was making computer games. I would like make games on the computer, and it's all the same like mode of like possibility and like creating something out of nothing. And I think it's like I don't know that this is true for everyone. I only know it's true for me. For me, that feeling of creating something is so powerful and so feels so good, and like feels like I don't know, like the idea that I might create something, and then especially if there's a way to like share it with someone else, it's like, it's really exciting. And I think it's like, when I think about now, like being a dad, like I think it's such a difficult thing to preserve. It seems like it's easy for the world to crush that out, because the world has school. The way school works is like, follow all these rules, like check off all these boxes,
Yeah.
get pretty good at every subject, like it's stupid. And the
Yeah.
more like we're doing school over video and I get to sort of watch what goes on all the time,
It's
I'm like,
horrifying.
why do we
Yeah.
do this? Yeah,
Yeah.
why
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
we doing this to ourselves? And more thinking like, how do I encourage the joy and the possibility? But anyway, I think that's that idea of like the joy of creating things and wanting to break down the barriers that keep people from being able to create stuff. That is a big through line for me. And it's goes into Sprint eventually, like it goes into building products, because building products for me was like, it was so fun when I was a kid to make stuff and to be in that world of possibility. And then you get into working with teams and it's like, wow, the potential possibility is huge, because if you're working with a team and you're working with a big company, like you can make something big and distribute to so many people.
Yeah.
But the obstacles and the headwinds and all of those stupid compartments, just like they exist in schools, and like they just get like they're everywhere, and it's so frustrating. And like Sprint is kind of a reaction to trying to figure out how to break through those things. And and Make Time is like kind of is kind of about trying to create possibility, and like in day-to-day life, when it's like it's hard, like everything is sort of, there's so many things that resist that. And you for me, it's like I feel like my life I'll be trying to figure out how to fight it, and not fight it in a way, at least though, that like tears me down at the same time, because you can also fight things so hard that you just like you don't have any chi left, you're just out of energy, like so yeah,
That's
that's
super
yeah, anyway,
interesting.
that's what I
That's
think.
super, super interesting. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it jives with my experience, the childhood experience of possibility. Grew up in a small town, also with very few distractions, or it was
Yeah,
all in my imagination and playing with friends.
yeah,
Um, but it also reminds me what you just said about you kind of bashing with the walls of reality. This is a famous
yeah.
quote from Steve Jobs,
Oh,
um,
I don't know it. What?
where he basically, oh, I wish I could find it, but it's on YouTube. So, but he's saying basically most people live as if like the walls of reality that are made by other people are like just part of reality. And I've always, if there's one thing I wish to convey to people, is like, everything in the world is made by people no smarter than you. And everything can be changed, and everything like this, essentially seeing the world of possibilities.
Oh, here, I found it. I found it online. I googled it.
Nice.
When you grow up, you tend to get told that the world is the way it is, and your life is just to live your life inside the world. Try not to bash into the walls too much. Try to have a nice family life, have fun, save a little money. That's a very limited life. Life can be much broader once you discover one simple fact. Everything around you that you call life was made up by people that were no smarter than you. And you can change it, you can influence it. Once you learn that, you'll never be the same again. That's a good one.
Yeah, it's one of my
That's the
favorites.
Goodreads version of it. I don't know if that's accurate.
Yeah, no, I
Quotes on
mean,
the
there's
internet. I learned when writing books that like you can't trust a quote on the internet unless you can find the primary source. There's so many things that are like
for sure.
Abraham Lincoln said, and then it's like, no, wait a second, like that.
Yeah,
Did he really say that? That seems a little like, if you can kind of like, a lot of times you kind of, if you just look for a second, you're like, that doesn't quite seem like the. Sometimes it's like that doesn't seem like the right
yeah,
sort of sentence structure for that era or whatever. There was
yeah.
this one quote that's beautiful, and I could never figure out. I was never able to track down who actually said. I'm sorry, this is a total tangent, but it's a beautiful quote, and it sort of goes with what we were talking about. But let's see, this moment shining like a star, melting like a snow. Let's see if I can find it. I'm trying to. this is great content right now. I'm actually running a Google search live. Okay. Yes. Okay. So if you so okay, here's the quote, and I think this is great. And I was considering putting it in Make Time.
Hmm.
Uh, begin doing what you want to do now. We are not living in eternity. We have only this moment, sparkling like a star in our hand and melting like a snowflake. That's one version of it.
Mm.
Here's a better. We have only this moment, sparkling. Yeah. Okay. So begin doing what you want to do now. We're not living in an eternity. Okay. So this is attributed to Francis Bacon, but if you look up quotes by Francis Bacon,
You can't
that
find.
is not the way Francis Bacon talks.
Yeah.
This is like here. Okay, so now I'm going to a Francis Bacon quote. Let me just. Okay, so just, sorry. This is like it's like a random tangent, but like, some books ought to be tasted, others to be swallowed, and some few to be chewed and digested. Reading maketh a full man, conference a ready man, and writing an exact man. That is not the same kind of wording at all. And so I found, like, as I tried to track this thing down, I found, and oh man, I don't have the book around here right now, but there was this woman who wrote like self-help books. She was, I think, one of like the kind of the first sort of in this genre of just like self-help books in like, I was like the 30s or 40s.
Yeah.
And it totally matches her writing style. And somewhere on the internet, I found that quote attributed to her.
Yeah.
But because there was a conflict, I felt like I can't attribute it to her unless I can prove. I need to like really know. But her books are totally out of print. And so I found a used copy of one of her books on Amazon, and I got it, and I like read the whole thing, and it wasn't in there. But it was totally like, I was like, this is totally her syntax.
You could probably find
so
some
aggravated.
academic database of scanned books or something. But
I tried Google Books. I spent, because this is like, if you have a big project, like if you're writing, and I mean, I talk about all this lofty stuff about possibility, but the reality is when I actually am trying to write, I'll seek any distraction to get away from it. So I went way down the rabbit hole of like, how thoroughly can I try to find this quote? And
that's
yeah,
really funny.
Man, I couldn't get there.
It sounds like a paraphrase of the Diamond Sutra from Buddhism. But like, I mean, in a very different way. But like, let me see if I can find. Yeah, here. This is a translation, of course. Thus shall you think of this fleeting world: a star at dawn, a bubble in a stream, a flash of lightning in a summer cloud, a flickering lamp, a phantom, and a dream.
Oh, that's good. God, I should have asked you, because I could have just used that, and it sounds like we know where that comes from.
We know where that comes from. But yeah, no, I think it's I get the same thing a lot of times with Buddha quotes, because I now know a little bit about Buddhism, and the world, the internet is full of false Buddha quotes, like. And it's like, that's not even like, he didn't even know what that thing was like back then.
Yeah.
And like, and ideas that are definitely not even similar to Buddhism, or it's just like Buddha, Einstein, and Lincoln. They're all like the most misquoted.
Yeah. Here's what the Buddha has to say about how many megapixels your digital camera should have.
Exactly.
No, this is.
Yeah, that was the famous meme. The problem with the internet is, falsely attributed quotes. George Washington or something.
Oh man.
Anyway, so possibility is a really interesting thing, and it's also interesting that you take it into these places. Like Microsoft and Google, and then when you find that there's limits to possibility in those places, you keep pushing, because you've experienced enough possibility in your childhood. Like, you feel like that should be possible. It should be possible to do certain things.
Yeah, that makes it sound, I guess, more heroic than it. I mean, because the reality was that I arrived in those places and I was like so like excited to have these jobs, and like so I felt so like, oh man, I work at Microsoft, like cool. But then I was also like really intimidated by the way everybody did everything, and I just assumed that it was. I mean, that the Steve Jobs quote is very accurate. Like I assumed it's done this way for a very smart reason, and I just tried my best for years to conform. Like, how do I get along and do my small part in a way that is fun for me, and that still does have a through line to like creating things and that feeling of possibility. But how do I like what are the rules here? Like so much of life from the time you're born, it's like kind of trying to figure out like what goes on here, what are the rules, how do I make my way or like survive, in this in whatever place I'm in. And it's I think it's part of why we like books so much. We like this experience of going into a character's head and then seeing how they, especially if they go into a new, there's a sort of like this saying that most stories are like a stranger came to town, or oh god, what's the summary? This is not. I won't look it up, but there's like a stranger came to town, or we all took a journey, or something. They're like the two, like many stories boil down to like that
Mm.
essence,
Yeah, yeah.
and
There's like 12 archetypes or something. Fun archetypes.
yeah,
Yeah.
and like both of those, like a stranger came to town, or like we all went on a journey. They both involve like learning about a new world, and when you learn about a new world, you're trying to figure out the rules and you're trying to understand how it works. And then in a story, in a book, everything clicks together eventually, and it all fits and it all works. And then the heroes like somehow they move through and succeed, and that's what we all want. We want to like figure out the rules from the time you're a baby to like you go to school to like you go to work, to you're trying to figure out the rules and then succeed in some way or survive or whatever. And like that's so that's what I was doing most of the time, just trying to like figure out the rules. And I don't know what happened eventually. I guess it was that notion of like, like maybe I started to see things that other people were doing, and things that and moments where I had broken the rules and it worked. And I was encouraged by different things. Like a thing that was a huge deal to me was reading Getting Real by 37 Signals, and that came out in 2006.
Hmm.
And I read that book and I was like, I can't even remember how I found out about it, but when I read it, I was like, whoa, what? Like, because they were just tearing down everything about the way we did
Yeah.
business, like any business did business building software. And like,
Is
man,
that the
this
book
is
that
like,
became Rework later?
I
Or
think so.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so
Yeah.
good. Yeah.
It's so good. And it was like, damn, this was just like I started to see everything differently. And I guess I started to see those things as walls and tunnels, and not like the perfect system.
Hmm.
It wasn't like Middle Earth that I should try to figure out and survive in. It was like, wow, this is just stupid. Like some
Right.
of these things just don't make sense. But it took a really long time to go from reading that. Like a lot of things in business books or whatever, like you come across a good idea, it's really hard to put those into practice, because I wasn't in charge. We're not in
Yeah.
charge of most of these systems. So it took a while to go from like to shift from like totally just like let me follow your rules and be the best uh employee I can be, to like, wait a second, the rules are weird, and like maybe being the best employee I can be, or like maybe I don't, when I see what success looks like here, like that's not success for me. And then like actually trying to actively do something different, and it was a long process.
Interesting. It's so interesting. So yeah, my experience is quite different. In I never really worked for corporate America or corporate anything.
Yeah.
I always worked for startups until we got acquired once, and just like we got acquired by Motorola in 2012, and I hated it. Like that was the first time I even was in a company that's bigger than 20
Yeah.
people, and I hated it so much. Um, and it does feel like because when I read Rework, I thought, oh, this is so good, this is so right. But like most of it is how the people I admired in startups worked. Uh,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
so it wasn't this clash. And then but so it sounds like what you took this kind of vision and you tried to find a way to bring about the change, at least in the creative process, where it kind of works like a startup inside of a big company. Uh,
Yeah, well, yeah, it's true, and it's like it ends up being a very startup-y way to work. But the genesis of it was, I think it was like reading things that suggested that the conventional wisdom is not all that wise. And rework, getting real was a huge one, and then another book I read that, I mean, all the books that sort of started to like break down my model, which was figure out what other people are doing. So I didn't study design. I'd studied art, and I just had always been making computer games and interested in like making web pages and like interested in that.
hmm,
But when I came in to work as a designer, my first job was at Oakley, the sunglasses company, and I was making like
nice.
animated GIFs at first, like ads, and then I did like I started to do web design there for their shopping websites, and then I went to Microsoft and was, you know, like a very junior designer. But in both those contexts, like I knew how to use the tools, um, and like I had this sort of sense from doing it of how to design products, but I hadn't studied it, so I just assumed like everybody else knows something I don't know, because they like at the very least other people who were, you know, my peers who, you know, were starting with the same amount of experience as me, had studied this stuff, and they like kind of knew how. I mean, although nobody studied, I was lucky because nobody had studied like HCI. You know, nobody had studied like human computer interaction or like anything like that. They'd studied like graphic design maybe, but even those people, I was like, well, they know something about design. Like I'm just kind of making up what seems right to me. And this was like really reinforced my sense of follow the rules at first. And yeah, and so getting real, but also like getting things done by David Allen, like that book made me start thinking about my own my own schema inside my brain
Mm,
being like maybe not right. And I, you know, and I would say now, like I don't think his is totally right either necessarily, but it does sort of like it was sort of the first thing maybe that started to shake up the way that I naturally think about doing things might not be
yeah,
right. And then you can start
it's
to
a
see,
systemic way, right? For me, it
yeah,
was the first time someone thought about, hey, everyday life activities in a way that's systemic and fits together, and you can see the logic of it. And
yeah,
so, yeah, you understand if you take out the, I don't know, the weekly reviews, it all falls apart. Everything is needed,
yeah,
but that doesn't
yeah,
mean that it's
yeah.
the one solution. It's just,
Right. But it's a system, and it's designed. It's a
yeah,
designed system.
yeah,
And and then this other book that was really influential to me was Made to Stick, which isn't really about designing things so much, but again, it's about like it shows the way that things break down and the way that things are stupid. And another one was Brain Rules. That was a impactful
right.
book for me. It's about like some of the, it was sort of like a summary of brain research, and what we know about the brain, and how like part of it was about how the way we present information and the way we, you know, the way we work like is counter to what works well for our brains.
Mm,
And so these things were all kind of just like started making me think like, oh, maybe conventional wisdom isn't right. And so that was at odds. There was just this tension, but it wasn't like then I had this like bolt of inspiration. It took a really long time to like live with that tension, before really like starting to actively think about redesigning it. Mostly it was just, it would so happen that this project would get under pressure, and then finally I'd like have to somehow steal away and just focus on doing design work, like just focus on drawing or whatever, for, you know, for 3 days, or just, you know, steal away with two other people on the project and just like hash out what we're going to what we're going to do and come up with some kind of a prototype. And those things are like some of the most powerful seeds for the design sprint, but they only came through like, those were just like the pressure release valves where I like went back to that mode of possibility and that mode of like creating and like
Yeah.
just doing it
Yeah.
and not negotiating constantly or not going to meetings constantly.
Yeah, like, but it's interesting because if that thing wasn't there, then you'd probably quit and try to change profession, or but you had a sense that it was possible, and you like, let's just get together and do this,
Yeah,
and
yeah, right. That's true. That's true. That sense that it was possible was there. And I remember
yeah.
one thing that was really powerful for me was I was working on Microsoft Encarta. This is this encyclopedia on CD-ROM.
By the way, great product. I
Oh,
was
thank you.
so into it
Yeah,
as a young teenager, I guess.
I think that it was great, and I
It was so
I
exciting. It
do
was.
mourn it a little bit because
I
Wikipedia is just, Wikipedia is much more broad, but it's not as good. I don't think that the
I
articles are as good.
I just think like just even thinking back to a time where like how excited I was when we got Encarta. Um, because the whole idea, the whole premise of an encyclopedia doesn't hold anymore in the internet in a way.
Yeah,
Like even
yeah,
Wikipedia.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
but like the idea from the like 18th century of like let's organize all of human knowledge in books,
yeah,
and it will be the
yeah,
authoritative like all of human knowledge. And now we have the internet, and it makes any encyclopedia look ridiculous.
yeah.
Like
And we have this like ongoing crises about what is knowledge, what is truth and reality, because
right,
it's all there. And how can you tell? And I think what's one thing that's interesting about Encarta is it's like this dying gasp of saying, no, like this is the facts, like
right,
this is the body of knowledge. And we were like stretching to the max because we knew Wikipedia was going to always have more. So it's like, how can we encompass as much as possible and say that it's true, but really have it be true? Whereas like with Wikipedia, I feel like you always have crap in there. Like it's a very smart system, but there's so much crap in there. Like if
yeah.
you um and like there's a Wikipedia article about design sprints, and it's just I read it and I'm like, oh, like it's not accurate. Like,
But you can
and so that
edit
like
it. You can fix it. No,
I get,
I
yeah,
know, I
I
know, I
know
know.
you can't. If it's your own thing, I think they would probably, I don't know. And I also don't care enough. Obviously I care enough that I brought it up, but I don't care enough to do anything about it. But the man, but yeah, so what we're talking about, oh yeah, Encarta. So there's this moment where Encarta is, okay, they're coming out with Windows, oh man, what was it called? Vista is what it called when it launched. I think of it as Longhorn because that's what we called it inside Microsoft. It was called Longhorn was the code name. And it was going to be this big revolutionary shift, where like Windows XP was built on the same foundation that went back to like Windows 95. They were like redoing the code base. It was going to be it felt like it was going to be as big of a deal as like, Mac OS 10, only a much bigger deal because of course in those days, like Mac was like this little, had been relegated to this little niche
Yeah.
product. And although I was a Mac user sort of throughout, but they so they're building Windows Longhorn, and there's this idea that they're going to be these sort of flagship products. And one of the things that we're going to do is make Encarta like a version 4 Longhorn for Windows Vista that's just beautiful showcase for how amazing Windows Vista is. And so I'm really bummed because it's like I've been working on this. There are like a few other designers working on Encarta, and the other designers all get to work on the new fancy one, and I'm still working on like the old, like so they're working on the like 2 years out one, and I'm working on the like next year's just iteration of our same old product.
Mm.
But it turns out to be kind of cool because I get to have a little bit more say in what we build. And then what happens is that they find out that Longhorn is going to be pushed out even another year. So there's the year that they thought they were going to be able to do this big fancy new version of Encarta, and they were going to get all this help from like the Windows team, is not going to happen. And they have to like redesign, do something with Encarta in that year. And so I'm like, I now know how the old thing works, and I have these ideas, and so I like sketch this stuff, and like I get to pitch it to the VP, who to me is like basically like, a deity. And I'm like, here's my idea. I'm just like I'm like 20, I don't know, 3 or something. And I'm just like, and now it seems like, sure, people like run companies at that age, but I just felt so intimidated. And I'm like, here's all this stuff that I sort of thought through, and it was all kind of hand drawn, and like, and that was like the first moment where and she went for it, and she was like,
Nice.
yeah, like, well, cool, let's do this. And I got to lead that project. And that was like, so can you hear the dog barking? I'm going to close my windows if you can.
Sort of. Yeah, very.
Sort of. Should I close the window?
Friendly.
It would only take.
You don't need
I'll
to.
close the window.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. If the dog keeps barking, yeah, these dogs don't stop barking. Hold on. I'll be right back.
Okay.
These dogs, we've lived here for like a year, and the dogs next to us, it's these two, I think they're Pyrenees, and they're great dogs, but they bark like a lot. And at first we were so annoyed by the dogs barking. We have a dog too, and it'll set our dog off barking, and he's not like super well behaved, so it's like we're just like, we're like so stressed. But then a couple things happened that really like changed our tune about it. One time the dogs are out there barking, and they're like, row, row, row. And then like the owner came out, and he's like, no, no, no. And the dogs are like, row, row. Right? We just saw it from the dog's perspective. They're like, yeah, he's barking too.
Yeah,
he's in on it. Yeah.
He's into it.
But then the other thing is we've seen them because they live like just a couple, sort of around the corner basically, and we see them out walking their dogs, and the people are like super nice, and the dogs look super friendly, and we're like, oh, they're just like kind of naughty dogs who bark a lot. And it's funny how many things in life are like that. Like when it seems like some, some like, oh, those people are like that dog, it's like really annoying. But then when you just start to see that, like, oh yeah, like from the outside, when our dog barks, I'm sure people think that we're stupid. So now we just call them the naughty dogs and close the window. Anyway, what was I talking about?
No, I totally hear you. When I was in Thailand, so it's the mindset, right? Like one moment it really is annoying to you, and then you sort of accept it.
Yeah.
So when I was in Thailand, I was staying in this guest house on the kind of verge of, I guess it's kind of like a jungle area, and I go into I'm like, I'm gonna splurge. I'm not like these young kids. I'm gonna buy this single room. Like I'm not gonna sleep with a bunch of people, and I want AC, and I'm gonna like pay for it. So I do it, and I go in, and it's full of cockroaches and like what is it called? Like the reptile little thingy, geckos.
Lizard? Geckos.
Yeah, like,
yeah.
Geckos, and like there's a giant spider on my pillow, and I have this moment of like I'm going to flip out, and then I'm like, wait, it's the jungle. This is their place. I'm just here for a couple of days. Like we're on the verge of the jungle. What am I gonna do? So I literally pick up the giant spider, throw it away, and go to sleep. And had no problem with the creatures in the place anymore. Because it's just like it's a shift of mindset.
I've done a big shift on spiders. Not big. I mean, I don't love them, but they used to scare the hell out of me. Like it wouldn't take much of a spider to scare me. And they're startling. I mean, there's something about, I guess, I think that if you have sort of, human wiring. Like there's something about it that's like signals danger. Like it, it does the way it moves, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah,
Maybe it's not everybody, but I think,
it's
but
probably
man,
instinctual.
yeah, but I feel more, yeah, more like, okay, just get out of here. Like we have a lot of trees around where we live, and this time of year they're everywhere, and they're inside. And now sometimes like they're inside, and I'm just like, all right, spin your web there. I'll give you if you're on the counter, I'm going to put you outside, but
Yeah.
I only squish them if it's like really, you know, life or death.
Yeah.
How did you literally pick it up? You picked up the spider?
It was a tiny. I went like this. I went
Okay.
like this.
Okay.
But it was like large but thin, like very thin.
Okay.
It wasn't like big hairy tarantula kind of.
It is disturbing to think about a spider on your pillow because you're like, well, that'll be my face in like a few hours.
It's the jungle.
Yeah.
Like if this was like
Yeah.
so we have this conception of inside versus outside,
But they don't care.
that's not. Yeah, but you're in the jungle. You're in their space, and it's a hut. So anyway, so this is like so you tell me because
No, we're
we
good.
took
We
our
just
time.
let's keep going.
Okay,
Let's keep
okay,
going a bit
okay.
more. Yeah.
So I'm wondering like. And later I may ask you to give your latest definition of the sprint, but for now I'm wondering like when did it become a thing? Because and this is a weird thing to say, but the main thing about the sprint, like to me, the main innovation about the sprint is that it is a thing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're
You
right.
know what I'm saying?
I do, and that's a really interesting observation. I hadn't thought about that, but as you were saying, like, when did it become a thing? I was thinking, like, well, at first, that's all it was a thing. Like, it was, it started as a thing, and that is the central key to it is that it's a thing. It was, so like leading up to it, I don't know. I could talk about it for any amount of time. Maybe I'll skip that. There's things that happen leading up to it that kind of like put various parts of these thoughts in my head.
Mm.
But basically what happened was I thought, okay, we have like this problem at Google I can see right now. This is in 2010, where there are a lot of like cool projects, but I had been in Google for like 3 years, and I could tell that the way that things happened, or the reasons why some things happened and some things didn't happen, it wasn't really necessarily a good reason. It was just sort of what happened. And like there were projects that should not have happened that did, and there were projects that like really
Google
should.
Plus.
And yeah, Google Plus. I mean, this is before that this is like at the beginnings of that happening. Okay. But Google, I think Google Wave had happened, and like they were just like there were dumb things already.
I was one of my Halloween costumes was Google Wave.
What did you do?
I think I had a T-shirt with the Wave logo. No. I had a T-shirt with the Google logo, which I got from a friend who worked for Google, and then I did the Wave logo in makeup on my face. Anyway,
that is such a, that is a very interesting example. No, it's great. It's great. Yeah, it is dorky, but also great. But that product is that's a tangent, but like it definitely epitomizes a lot of the thing. It's like it's not one I think people jump to as like the example of Google doing something stupid, because there are so many like better ones since then, like Google Plus and Google Glass. But it is like it really does have these key elements of like you have like an executive who's super excited about a technology, and that executive is thought of as a genius by the founders, and so is just given sort of a blank check to the mandate to do this thing. And then there's like no thought, because this person has that trust, for whatever reason, it's different reasons in different cases, but because this person has that trust, in this case, because they had been the founders of Keyhole, which became Maps and was really successful, then there's like there's no sense of like, will there be product market fit for this? It's just like, no, there will, because the technology is great and this person's great, therefore this will be great.
Right.
And I'm sure there are examples where that works out, but I think it actually doesn't usually work out, and it's amazing that smart people like screw that up so much, and it's so costly, and it happens time and time again with companies.
Yeah.
There's executives who have that thing, and I think whatever it is, we talked about at the beginning, politicians, and if they have that thing that people like, and inside a company, a big company, executives need to have a certain thing that like the CEO goes for. I think if they have the thing that the CEO goes for, then they can get away with murder, and they can get away with horrible ideas and horrible things, and it wastes so many people's time, years of people's lives. I mean, there are much sadder things in the world than like if you worked on Google Wave.
A bunch of Googlers wasting a couple of years making
that's not that sad. But on this, but then again, like on the scale of the whole planet, like all of the time that's wasted on stupid stuff, and also all the things that are made,
the alternative
that are
uses
like,
that you could have at that time.
And the stuff that does make it out there and that people do end up using, that's garbage, because people, it's this force of personality, or it's like, we just don't, I don't know. It's
I believed in Google Wave until I used it. Like, I mean, the pitch was really exciting until
what was the pitch? I mean, I guess it was like, was it like Slack?
Well, no, it was like essentially, I'm trying to remember, but it was essentially email but real time. So lots of people are in the same conversation, and you can all kind of, it's almost like an ethereal Slack. Like you're creating a Slack just by starting a conversation. And it was before the age of like Messenger and WhatsApp and iMessage and all that stuff. So before you saw it, before you tried to use it, I thought it was, I was curious about it, and I was very happy to get an invite. And then but then I used it once, and I was like, what is this for?
And it had that element of like, you're like, you could see what the person was typing, which is just people use that inside Google and are like, God, this is terrible. Like, I don't want people to see what I'm typing while I'm thinking about it. Like that. And yet, like, nobody, the boss wouldn't listen, and like, this is like, anyway, there were things there. So the context was, there were things that were I was more interested in actually the things that could be, I thought, really cool. And it was really hard to get them going. Because there were a lot of those. This notion of 20% time at Google meant that there were a lot of like really interesting projects. And I had worked on, in the couple of years prior to that, I'd worked on 2 of those that I thought were really cool. And I had seen how hard it was to get them going. One of them became Priority Inbox in Gmail. And it's this tool to use machine learning to sort of filter, like organize the good stuff in your email. Hopefully,
I used it. I used it until I started using Superhuman. It's still good. It's still great.
I wish Superhuman used it, actually. Like, I use Superhuman, and I do miss, like, when I go back to use Gmail, I'm like, oh yeah, that is nice to have it like divided into those. To me, it's nice to have it divided into those 2 chunks. But in Superhuman, you can move so fast that it almost doesn't matter.
But no, isn't it like the important tab? Isn't it the same as the important section in Priority Inbox? It's not using the same marking.
Oh, that's a good question.
I think it is.
I should take a look at that. I was under the impression that it was using something else, but if it does, I'm sold. Anyway, it's good tech, and I think it was a good idea, and we to take that from like it was an engineer's 20% project to take that to like something we were going to build. Me and this engineer, like she and I basically ran like what were sort of like 4 design sprints, like each week coming up with a design, building a prototype. And in this case, we launched it to like a bunch of Googlers who would then their email was using this sort of, she would like kind of hack the front end for this build, so that it used the design we were testing. And and that was sort of this thing that unblocked this thing, like sort of like launched it into like, oh, okay, this could make sense. We got something we had confidence in to build.
Mm.
And then the same thing with what is now Google Meet, where it was like 1 week of time. Me and a couple of other folks who'd been working on this 20%, we'd been working on this 20% project together, and we've been working on it for years. And then when we got together for a week and made a prototype and put it in people's hands, then everything changed. And so my thought was like, okay, it'd be really cool to use that tool to use some kind of a focused effort to get things going.
Mm.
And I'd been exposed to, I had facilitated some design thinking workshops and been taught how to do that, like when I came to Google. And there was something really powerful about convening people and having a structure.
Mm.
But I'd also seen that those like didn't stick. They didn't like hold the momentum. They didn't end with a prototype. I wasn't totally confident in all the activities that we did in those design thinking workshops. And so anyway, in the beginning, I sat down with Irene Au, she was the head of design at Google. And I said, like, look, I want to take this job of working as a design manager for the Seattle and Kirkland offices. This is in Washington State, which is where I live now. And my idea to manage these teams was I was going to run the design sprint. And I remember first like going to this coffee shop by my house and like kind of jotting down like roughly some notes about what I thought this thing could be. And then basically saying to her, like, here's this idea for this thing. I'll call it a design sprint. And like, I'll use some of the designers from our team, and I'll recruit people from elsewhere in the company because I knew a lot of designers. I knew pretty much everybody at that point. And we'll spend a week with a team when they're starting something off. And there was this shortage of designers at Google. And so that seemed like I was able to, and she was like, yeah, like I didn't have the details yet, but as a thing, she was like, yeah, like I could, she's like, I'll give you a shot to do this. And which was a huge deal, right? Because I had like no evidence really, and relatively like I think up to that point I had worked on projects that were hard in terms of like politically, like getting teams that maybe were difficult, or like multiple locations, or starting those 20% projects. They were hard, but compared to other product designers at Google, I hadn't done anything that was particularly impressive. And so like looking back now, I can say, oh, well, that thing became Google Meet, and that's now a real product that Google's trying desperately to make people use instead of Zoom.
Yeah.
But like at that time, it was just still something we were using internally, and only like just barely, and it was like really geeky still at that point. And so she definitely took a chance on me being able to do it, and which was huge. And then from then on, it was just like selling the idea of the thing. Sorry, I just talked for like 2 hours about your question about what's
super
like the
super
thing,
interesting.
but that's the essence of it.
So if because really like we're going to kind of maybe try to reverse engineer some of these things, but in the sprint, but the the idea that you're all exposed to all of these different projects, and they really needed some design discipline and some design work, and it needed to be a thing because you needed a thing for all of these different, because you're going into these situations and you needed it, and you started developing it, and you're like, oh, it's going to be a thing that I use again and again. Is that how it kind of grew? So at this point, you're not thinking this is going to be a world-changing thing.
No, but
my thing. Yeah.
I did think
Okay.
that this could be a Google changing thing. I remember that
Hmm.
was my hope.
Hmm.
Like my ambition was I want to create a method for Google to start big projects
Hmm.
because they don't have that. And
Hmm.
I knew by that point, I was like, well, I've worked at Microsoft for many years. I had worked there for like 5 or 6 years. I've worked at Google now for, I don't know, it was like 3 or 4 years at that time. And I'd worked at Oakley, and Oakley was like a weird organization and a very different kind, not a software company, but, but like a pretty big company. And it was clear to me that like the recipe everybody used for starting big projects was chaos. Like that was that like it was, there was no formal thing that we did. And I was like, well, there could be actually something really good at the beginning of starting a project. Like
Yeah.
not only is there not like nothing, but like it could actually be good. And I've seen things happen. I've seen moments in work that were really good.
Hmm.
So how could I create those? And I knew that from working on the Gmail team, I felt like I was finally working with like a really high performing, like it was me and two other designers. The other two were Braden Coates, who would go on to be the first venture partner at Google Ventures and co-author on the book. And he also designed, like, this is just kind of a fun fact about him. He designed this app for a startup that his friend, who was an engineer from Gmail, left Google and started. And oh man, I want to say it was called Beluga, but I'm not sure that's right. But Facebook acquired it, and it's what Messenger is based off of.
Okay.
And so it's like Braden is an amazing designer.
Hmm.
Michael Leggett, who would go on to be like the lead Gmail designer, and then left. He designed Inbox. He sort of like co-founded the product Google Inbox, and then went to go work at Facebook and was working on the Messenger team. And he was so these are like really really good designers, and we had a great product manager team, and um, it felt like very high performing work. And I felt like I was seeing decisions made with like in smart ways. And I did feel like some confidence that like we could like bring some of that goodness. Like I thought even within Google, like Gmail is a pretty well performing team, but I know we don't have a great way of starting these new projects. We're kind of trying to figure it out when we do it. And so I guess I had enough confidence that like nobody has something like this. There's good stuff out there. And if I could offer this to Google, this could make, I thought, naively maybe now I would say, but like I thought I can make the world better because there's really cool potential inside of Google. There's a lot of possibility here. And this process if we had a way to start projects so that the interesting ideas actually made it, they actually got the momentum they need, that would be good for that would be good for the world. Like I believed in the Kool-Aid. I drank the Kool-Aid, the Google Kool-Aid, and I thought
Yeah.
this would be like really powerful. And so that was the idea, was to sort of unlock more of the potential of Google. And it definitely did not occur to me then that it would be useful outside of Google. I mean, I wasn't even sure if it would work inside of Google.
Hmm.
But
Yeah, no, and it turned out to change much more than Google. So many companies
well,
now.
I mean, I would say that it's both more and less successful than I'd hoped, because it did, like, it has not, I don't think it's changed Google. Like, I don't
Hmm.
think it has fundamentally changed that the way big projects are started there. I might be wrong because it's been a long time since I've been inside there, but just anecdotally, like I think that they've embraced it. I think it as an idea is stuck around, and they've done an excellent job they've trained lots of people to facilitate. I know they do lots of sprints,
Yeah.
but I don't know that it happens in the beginning with the leadership in the way that we were able to do it in the first days, and in the way that I had like really hoped it would happen. I hoped it would change that dynamic of like, oh, we're just going to trust this VP to like go do this thing or whatever. I don't know if it actually has changed that. And I don't, and that's what I want. I would like to see people fundamentally change the way they make decisions and fundamentally change the way they work together
Mm,
from the get-go when it's really important,
yeah,
not when it's sort of convenient. But
yeah.
it has been more versatile and more sticky than certainly than I ever would have thought.
I mean, maybe you didn't completely change Google, but you completely changed Lego, and and you
Yeah, that,
complete,
yeah,
you
accident,
know,
yeah, right, by accident, which is
and
actually what way cooler to me. uh,
yeah, and there's other companies that I think are very very sprint heavy, and all the big companies are running sprint sale at least occasionally
yeah,
at critical
yeah, yeah,
moments, and I still I think it's still really early, even
I
though
agree. Yeah, I agree. I think you're right about that. It has a
uh,
long. There's a lot more. There are a lot more opportunities for sprints to be run than there are sprints run
yeah,
for
I
sure.
started talking about sprints. You know, maybe. I mean, I ran sprints before, but maybe started talking publicly about sprints like in the last 2 years, and I've already turned a couple of giant companies into like sprint
Yeah,
running companies, um, and it wasn't hard. Like, oh, I just had to
yeah.
tell them what it was, right? And
That's awesome. That's
um,
really awesome.
so I feel like you know it's still early, and but it's super impressive, right? So you ran it with how many dozen companies in Google, projects in Google, and then 150 startups at GV, and then now it's, you know, it's rare to hear of a large company that's not at least exploring sprints, or you know it's definitely in tech, but I'm thinking other areas as well, like banks and uh,
Yeah, yeah, and I think, like you said, it's still sort of the early days. So I think a lot of a lot of people are hearing about it for the first time. And something that I saw when the book came out, it seems like it took like a year before people had maybe gotten the book and then they actually had the chance to run a sprint, because
right.
you usually can't just go run a design sprint like the next day, like you've
Yeah,
got to have the
I actually
project.
did. I
Did you?
actually I read the book. um, I was the head of product at an agency in New York,
Yeah, yeah.
and I read the book, and I called a meeting of the heads of the company to say this is how I want to do this now, and
Oh, that's awesome.
literally the head of business development was in that meeting, left to take a call, and sold the first sprint that we did.
That is amazing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's awesome, but I don't think that's most people's experience. Most people are like, they read it and they're like, okay, I'll wait. The project has to be at the right point, and I have to convince my colleagues, or I have to convince the boss, or if they're not the boss, even if they are the boss, like, when's the right moment to do this? And so it has this like very slow burn usually before the first sprint. And then it normally, I think it takes like a couple sprints inside an organization before everybody looks at that and says, oh, we can do this here. This
Mm,
isn't something that like we're, you know, Silicon Valley startups or Google or whatever, but it feels like something we can do here.
mm.
And it takes time. So I am hopeful that it will like it will continue to spread more and more and
I
be
have very
more
little
use to
doubt.
people.
I have very little doubt. I am, in fact, betting my current career on it. Uh, but no, I see it as kind of because I've seen this trajectory with like agile, and then kind of lean
Yeah,
design and lean
yeah,
startup, where there was a book, and then people were talking about it for a while, and then after, like, there's it's like ideas spread very slowly through cultures, even
totally.
innovative cultures. And but after the Lean Startup book came out in 2011. By 2015, you couldn't really you couldn't really try to find a job as a product manager for a startup without knowing the book by heart, you know, and
Right, 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 right.
um,
Yeah.
so it's, you know, it takes time, but you know, it's interesting. I believe it's getting strong. So I have this question for you. So, you know, the sprint is obviously, so first of all, maybe if you, what's your current definition for the sprint? When you meet someone like a friend of your wife or someone who doesn't know anything about you and is like, "Whoa, what is the sprint thing?" What do you tell them?
If I meet someone in like that kind of context, I usually say it's like a boring business process and you don't want to hear about it because I've like I was sort of like most of the time in my real life I would just rather not talk about it. Like it's
Funny.
I you know it's like because I I know that when I start talking about it, I mean it's like full on like geek out. Like I can talk about it forever, but I'm very well aware that like I don't think most people really care a whole lot. And I don't love talking about um you know, oh like I worked at Google, I worked with startups, I worked in venture capital. Like I it's fine like when everybody already knows, like we've already set the context in this conversation that we're talking about business stuff. And then
Yeah,
it's fine. Like
yeah,
I'm happy to like bring all of that like luggage to the table.
yeah,
But I don't want to I don't want to like frame a conversation I have with like when I have the opportunity to have a conversation with a human being and not
yeah,
be that person,
yeah.
I don't want to be that person. I want to like leave that stuff out of it if I can. And you
Interesting.
know, and then I'll usually say like if people if it does if I can't just avoid like what do you do, I'll say like, oh, I'm mostly a writer these days. And then if they you know if they ask what kind of book I write, I'm like, well, like I wrote kind of like a business book that is you know was like sort of successful. So I teach that this sort of business process and give talks about it. And that is like most of the time that's the extent of what I say about it.
Interesting.
Uh, but but if I'm explaining, yeah, if I do have sort of have to explain to somebody, I say like the idea is like you take like when you're starting a big project, you take like roughly a week of time, like 4 or 5 days. You clear the calendar, you get a small group of people together, and you sort of follow this like checklist of activities to go from sort of this starting point where you just know you're going to start the project to at the end of the week you've made a prototype of some kind and you're testing it with your customers
Hmm.
and um, and that is I think I mean that is the core that I've hit in that on most of the core ideas of the sprint. It happens at the beginning. It's a checklist. It you know it has a prototype and a test. I think the part that doesn't mention that's really important is the decision making is very you know is very structured,
Hmm.
and the information sharing is very structured
Hmm.
and intentional.
Yeah.
um, but that you know like already I know that first sentence that I said about it is already like straining the bounds of what most people want to hear. And
Yeah.
it's not perfect because I know a lot of people hear that and they hear like prototype tests, design sprint. They're just kind of already like putting that into a little compartment of
Hmm.
sort of web design geekery that they don't care about, you know, and so
Hmm.
so if I it depends on then if I'm trying to really like sell somebody on it, you know, who isn't, you know, who's like more of a business person, then I'm talking more about like, look, this is a way for a startup to assess whether they have product market fit for
Yeah.
a new product, a new feature, some big new initiative.
Yeah.
And we use this process to help a team assess product market fit. And then like that's using different keywords to really like try to
To
rope in
activate.
somebody who might
Yeah.
have kind of like put up the shields when they heard design sprint.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, no, I think when I talk to investors, I definitely talk about product market fit. When I talk to just people who ask me, what do you do?
yeah,
I say, I run this process developed at Google that takes you from an idea to a prototype, and then you get to even test it with users on the final day. And
That's good. I like how you say and then even. Like it's kind of cool because it's like almost like it's like the infomercial. It's like
yeah,
you
yeah,
get this, but then you also get this and you
yeah,
also get
all
this.
that
I like that a
feedback. Yeah,
lot.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But people think it's cool when you say it. Like, people who have nothing to do with design or
Yeah.
startups get it. They're like, oh, so you start with an idea and you actually make something happen. Like
Yeah.
it's a cool transition. Uh, so what are some things? Now I'm learning that you actually prefer not to tell people anything about this, which is weirdly makes sense to me, knowing you. But not that it actually makes sense. It
It's
makes sense from knowing you. Uh, but but I was wondering, what are some clever things you did in the sprint that you wished more people would appreciate, or more people would
yeah.
like? Because I look
Yeah.
at it and
Yeah.
I find like all these little clever things that not many people are talking about,
Oh,
or
thanks.
they
Yeah.
just seem to work. It's also it's kind of sneaky in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I mean, all this, yeah. Well, thank you for noticing, some of the sneaky things. Um, I am probably like most pleased with how the decision making works in the sprint because it's like, it's this layer that like is woven in throughout the whole process, throughout the whole time of the sprint.
Yeah,
And it's meant to um, like short circuit, like defuse a lot of bad decision making things that happen, but also like, but not just do that. Like it's also more more importantly, it builds the right kinds of decisions. Like it builds the, gives the tools and the context and the structure to create really good decisions. And then the whole thing is really healthy for decision making because it's this tight loop where the decision is not binding. Like you're just making some choices for this week, and then you test it, and in so doing you're educating the team, and in particular the decision maker,
right.
about the customer. You're bringing them closer to the customer and giving them like this real sort of connection, hopefully, with what they're making and why it matters or doesn't matter to people,
Mm,
so that they can make better decisions next time.
yeah.
And that is like, I um, I read, speaking of books, like there's this book Decisive by the Heath brothers, who also wrote Made a Stick, and it's a great book. And it actually came out. It's funny because I was talking about this with my co-author John Zarasky the other day, and because I was thinking like, oh, I think we borrowed a lot of ideas, like learned a lot of ideas or stole them from Decisive, but it it actually, I looked at when Decisive came out, and it came out after we had already like I'd written the blog posts about the sprint, which have
Mm,
like the process in it. So I think we just sort of luckily, like the sprint process happened to evolve to match what turned out to be really good advice on decision making. And I don't think that's because I'm so smart or we're so smart. I think it's just because like when you get the chance to watch people make decisions over and over again, and if your primary driver is like, how do we help people make good decisions, you will notice things like people need to have more than one option. They can't make a good decision if you just say one option, like thumbs up or thumbs down. And you
mm,
need to have like, you need to hear not just like what's good about everything, but you need to have like criticism. You need to have the chance to have competition,
yeah.
and you need to have the chance to try things out. And, and like, so all these things are just sort of, I think, what any logical, rational person or team would get to if they had the chance to do the same process over and over again. But most people just don't get that chance. The most unique thing about the design sprint is that,
Is that it's a thing?
I got the chance with my colleagues to, it's a thing. And I got the chance because it's a thing to do it like 200 times and like try to make it better. And most things you don't get the chance to do them 200 times.
Yeah.
So, so that's that. So yeah, I mean, decision making, I feel like is like a really big one. There's also some stuff about if you are trying to come up with a solution to a problem And through the lens of like doing design work, I had done this many times as a designer, and before that as a kid, trying to make something. How do you set somebody up to be able to make something? And so in the first 2 days, like the map and sketch parts of the sprint, really trying to set somebody up to be able to make something, make a solution.
Yeah.
And some of that stuff I feel really good about too. Like it always makes me feel good if I'm teaching this sprint and I've got, if there's like 100 people and I see them all get to the point where they need to come up with a solution and everybody's able to do it, and I feel really good about that.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. It definitely the voting is very unique, but also kind of very familiar as someone who worked in startup teams when we weren't locked in the same room trying to create a product.
Yeah, yeah,
Oftentimes, you use a vote, and the CEO is still in the room, so of course you vote, and then of course the CEO decides anyway, right?
right, yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so that dynamic works really, really well. And then I loved when I first saw the map, because I was um, actually at the time working on a kind of a mind mapping system mapping tool
Oh yeah,
as a side project for myself,
yeah,
because I always thought that is the essence of design, is to understand how things come together and where the points of potential intervention or the challenges
right.
are, and when I read it I was like, oh, they get it. And of course, in the context of the sprint, it comes exactly at the right time, and you keep fleshing it out with the experts, and you emerge from the first day with such clarity, uh, even after the first day, which is quite incredible. It's quite, I think that's definitely one of my favorites. uh, the other favorite thing for me is and I wonder if this was just an existing thing that wasn't aware of, but the audacity of taking a group of people into a room and saying everything you do for the next week is timed with a timer, and
Oh yeah.
and you have 20 minutes to do this and 45 minutes to do this. Did you see something else that had a similar thing, or did you just like?
Yeah, there were two things that gave me that idea. One of them was, well, maybe three, because the first thing was just the fact that I had so often worked under a deadline, and like I knew that you could do more stuff when you're under a deadline, and that's not everybody knows that, I guess, but like that went back to me working on the high school newspaper, and like we had what we called Hell Night, was like the night before it went to press,
That's
and
funny.
we're up late like printing stuff out and putting like hot wax on it and like gluing it down onto, laying it all out and sending it off to be printed. And like you can get it done every time before the deadline because you have to. And like,
Yeah.
and it was the same way with that Encarta story, with doing those drawings and trying to put together like the pitch to the VP. And it was the same way with those weeks that I had in Gmail, or the week with what became Google Meet. It was just like when there's pressure, and whether you're working alone or together, you can get it done and you find a
Right.
way.
Right.
And I always kind of loved those moments. Like they were like, it was good stress. Like it felt really
Yeah.
like you're just locked in, and it's that feeling of possibility. And so I knew it was possible. I was exposed to at Google, like I said, these design thinking workshops, and in those workshops there was a schedule for the workshop, and so the MC, or the person kind of running it, would say, we're doing this activity and you have X amount of time to do it. And
Mm.
these would be groups of like, it might be, they were usually big. It was usually like there might be 20 people or 50 or 200 or something, and you're
Mm.
sort of like wrangling everybody. It's like, okay, this next thing we're going to take, you do how might we know, so we're going to spend 20 minutes or whatever. And so I had this sense of like, you keep time and then you're like maybe counting down a little bit, but it's a different dynamic in a small room
Yeah.
to time things. And the
It
at
worked.
first I just kind of had to do it organically, which is hard. Like you just kind of like have to sort of try to steer the conversation to keep people moving. And that's hard. Like you try to kind of nudge people to wrap up, and it's, if you start off and you say, I'm going to facilitate this thing we're going to do this week, and is that all right with everybody? And that's something that my friend Charles Warren taught me to do at the beginning of facilitating. It helps. You ask for permission, and then, and then you kind of like, well, you kind of try to negotiate, but it's much easier when you have this schedule and you have a timer. And so this big moment was when I went into my son's classroom and I saw this thing, the time timer. When you have one,
Yep,
and
I have one here.
And I was like, oh wow, because I picked it up and I like saw how it worked, and I was like, where did you get this? To the teacher, like, what is this thing? And
Awesome.
I took a photo of it, and I like went and I bought I bought a couple right away. And then that makes a big difference, because then if you have a schedule and you have the timer, then like, I don't know, I guess you're right. I guess there's a little bit of audacity to it, but it built up from a lot of things.
Yeah.
And then by that time too, I would get so, I am very impatient. And it's funny because, I mean, you and I have been talking here for quite a while. Like, me, like I ramble a lot. Like I'm not like this super condensed, like always on time doing things. I'm late all the time and I talk too much. And yet it really makes me mad when, like, not mad, but like I get aggravated when people are just talking and talking and talking in a meeting. And when we're trying to get something done and I'm like, whoa, like let's come on, and it just annoys me. And so
the sense of possibility on the other side of that conversation.
Yeah, right. Yes, outside of here. And so so I think the thing that made me like rude enough to bring this timer for children into like an office where there's just like 5 people who are all sitting right there was that I get so frustrated with things going slow, and I just wanted to see what would happen. And I do remember it was like a bit like doing that for the first time. Like once I had done it and I knew it worked, it felt different to bring it out. But the first time it was like pretty, it was pretty like dickish to say like, okay, I'm going to time you all right now.
Yeah. I have certain aspects of the sprint in my contract when someone books me, and it says you are stating that you are aware that this is a timed process, that you can't just go into freestyle conversation, and everything is timed, that the discussion
is a good idea,
formulated. And I make clients read it before they sign, because it's important to note that they know what they're getting. And also it's important that I am not liable to produce any results if they're not obeying the process.
Totally. That's good.
So, but it's really, really cool, and it works really well. And you're right, once you bring the timer, it just works.
Yeah. And people love it. I mean, maybe I've just blocked it out and people have told me that it made them feel uncomfortable, but what I usually hear is like, that was great. Like, where do we get one of those timers? And like, finally, so it's an unmet need.
Yeah. So we went way over time, and I want to give you a chance to talk about what you care about most these days, and what's, any projects that you're passionate about. I mean, we just skipped like 7 awesome questions, but
we'll have to do it again. We'll have to do part 2. I'm most passionate right now. My project that I'm most passionate about is being a dad, and it is not a new project, but it's just it's a trying time to, as we just talked about at the beginning. It's like a trying time to be a kid. And so I feel like my number one responsibility, and I'm super lucky to have the kind of work that can be can be set aside a lot of the time, or rescheduled, or work around. But I'm just trying to figure out how to do a good job of that. And this is one of those contexts where you do see that the default things, while stupid, like the walls or the tunnels or whatever they are, those things, while stupid, they actually do, there's a lot of wisdom to them as well.
Mm.
And so there's wisdom to the structure of school because it lets kids go and have a life away from their family and get to be their own selves and be around their peers, and they can't. It's not easy unless like you have a long-term friendship. Like a 9-year-old doesn't have a conversation like you and I are having right now, just like over video. Like for him, video class school, it's like it's different, and it's not. It doesn't have a lot of the good stuff that default setting has, and so just trying to figure that out. That's like the number one project, and I don't. I am trying to kind of come back to those principles of possibility and we're trying to read things a little bit to be inspired by it, but a lot of it is just trying to like, this is in many ways it's an unprecedented situation where you just sort of have to question what matters and what's important.
Yeah.
I have other projects that I have projects for the design sprint. I have a million ideas about things that I'd like to do, and I'm only able to do the very first, like the things that don't take too much focus, that are at the top of priority. They're like on the matrix, they're like fairly easy and really important. And I can't do the ones that are hard and important, which I'd like to do. As you know, I've been working on the science fiction book for a while. I did manage to finish a first draft of it during the
Nice.
early quarantine. It's a mess though, and I need to come back to it, but I
want to read it. Can I read it?
Oh man, it has gaps and like the plot. I mean, maybe I might let you read it. I will be.
First of all, huge science fiction fan. Read every book about writing that you can imagine because I was trying to write for a while, and I give really good feedback because I was an editor.
Okay, here are my hesitancies about it. Number one, I know a lot of the things that are bad about it, so I don't need.
You want to fix some things first, yeah.
It's like it's so flawed that I'm like, well, yeah, you're gonna. I know. Like I know that chapter just says like TK,
but
chapter about.
That's funny. Like congratulations, though. I mean, the finishing a crappy first draft is.
It's something.
A huge step.
It's something. Yeah. And the other thing is, one thing that I worry about is like burning. Like you will only be able to read it for the first time once. Like so I really like. I want you to be able to. I want your feedback will be really good. You're like at this intersection of a lot of things where I thought like, you will be an amazing test reader. I want to be able to like act. I want to get feedback from you that I don't expect. And like, I'm sure I would right now, but like so much of it is like clearly broken that it would sort of be not fair to you. And I don't think I would be burning that silver bullet in like the best way.
That's fine. That's, by the way, that's a classic author move, is like, I'm saving you for round 2. Like,
but there is no round. I mean, there's nobody, like, I won't even let my wife read it right now. It's just like, it's so, I don't know if I'll ever even be able to finish this book because I'm trying to do so many things that I don't know how to do. It's like, and part of, and that's actually a problem with the, like the book shouldn't be so complicated that you can't do it. Like that's, I remember reading, do you read Stephen King?
Yeah.
So have you read the JFK book, 11/22?
I know of it, but no, I haven't read it.
I really like that one a lot. And the premise is like this simple thing is it's set in sort of contemporary times, and this guy comes across there's like a doorway that will take him back into like the 1950s in the same small town where he lives in the US. And he decides to try to stop the JFK assassination, because he's like, what's the most good I can do with this like amazing thing I've stumbled on? And he thinks, well, like knowing that, like knowing what will happen, what could I change in the course of history? And he sort of supposes that there's a chain reaction of bad things that happen because of the assassination, and that it involves like Vietnam and like other things. And so he's like, well, maybe I can stop some of that from happening. So that's sort of what, but a lot of the book is just him like like being back in the, it's really good. And it's like this, a stranger came to town, like as he goes,
Yeah.
he's a stranger in the past.
Sounds
But
like
what was
a
it? One thing I
fairly
thought,
well-defined, contained story because it's
yeah,
such a clear goal right up front.
yeah, which is really good. And I I find Stephen King like inspiring, but also like frustrating to look at as a model for how to do things, because I think he is so unique in some of
So
his
good.
abilities to pull things off that are very hard. But then he also does have this like clarity. Like that's an example of like what a great clarity of purpose, where like you can explain the premise of the book right off the bat and you're like, okay, I kind of want to see what's going to happen.
Yeah.
But he talks about in the he has a note at the end or the beginning of the book where he basically came up with the idea for that in like the 70s or something. And he tried to start writing it and he couldn't do it. And he said he like wasn't, he needed like more practice writing. And so he came back to it like 30 years later or something, and actually wrote it. And it
Yeah.
took him much longer than usually his books are like, he just bangs out like 2 books a year. It's 2 like 800-page books a year. But this one took like, I think 2 or 3 years.
Interesting. I should read
And
this
he
then.
had to wait to do it, which is like, it's super interesting.
Yeah.
The book is like, I think the book is so great. And then at the very end, I feel like he tries to explain the time travel stuff too much and he doesn't stick the landing. This is always like, to me, Stephen King, like rarely, I haven't read that many of his books, but like when he starts to try to explain why things are happening,
Right.
I don't think that usually lands to my
Yeah.
satisfaction. But when he doesn't, his voice, his writing voice is so enjoyable that,
Yeah.
yeah,
No, I totally agree with that. That's he's great with the mystery, and he's great with also like he has some realistic stories that are unbelievable. I found his book about writing to be super
yeah,
good.
it is really good. It is
Um,
really good.
but
But I
yeah.
struggle with that too. I've been following that advice a lot, like thinking this is what, because there's this part of what I find so inspiring about it. Well, what do you find inspiring about it? What's to you? What's the essence? If you like kind of boiled it down, what's the essence
Of King.
of that
Uh,
book of on writing? What that makes you inspired by it?
um, just the overall like looking at writing as a craft, and that you can learn, and kind of this deep lifelong um, view into it. So there's many great tips about writing, and like how to not use adjectives or whatever.
Yeah, yeah,
uh, but there's also just this like the psychology of writing, and just how to just sit down and write a crappy first version, and there's a lot of stuff that
yeah.
you kind of, this is a man who lived his whole life writing, and he knows what works, and that's what I found. I mean, I read it many years ago, so it's hard to kind of remember more detail, but
Yeah, I think there's this essence of like uh joy that he seems to have with his work,
mm,
like, and and like, but combined with like sort of a soft focus. Like there's this like this mix of like, he does consider it a craft and he takes it seriously,
mm,
and his focus on it is very serious. And yet he's very like, he just writes the book, right, and then he puts it away for a few weeks, and then he writes a second draft,
mm,
and then he sends it off and he's done. And he's kind of like it's just, to him, I think the essence is like he has joy in the writing. Like the writing is what's fun, and he doesn't want to make it perfect. He doesn't care. He
Yeah,
knows like it's not, like his very he's like he's like just being, he's sort of doing
yeah,
it and being. That's the impression that you get, rather than like
yeah,
holding on and trying to perfect. And I find that super inspiring. And then at the same time, it's like he is a freak. Like his ability to tell stories and his
yeah,
ability to write, it does come from really hard work. And I think it comes from him following a sense of possibility from when he was a kid. Like he was way into horror and
mhm,
stories and like writing when he was a kid, so he has like so many more reps than anybody else.
yeah,
But he's also like a freak, and so it's hard too, because you read it and like you can't take you can't compare yourself to freaks in life, like you can't compare yourself to like a freak athlete or like a freak, business person, or like you can't, because it's
yeah.
like
Did you
it's
watch the movie Amadeus?
no.
Oh my God, it's so good. Oh my God, it's exactly what you're talking about. It's the story of Mozart and this other composer who's kind of living at the same
uh,
time,
oh
Salieri,
man.
and that just love-hate relationship because
Yeah.
clearly this guy's a genius, but like I'll never be that.
Yeah.
And it's dark and funny, and it's really really great.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, I should check that out.
um, but um, but talking about, yeah, you can't. I mean, but it's still a better book to read. Have you heard of The War of Art?
Yeah, I have that book.
It's a
Yeah.
horrible, depressing book. Um, when I read it, I was like, okay, if this is what it takes to be a writer, fuck this.
I'm out. Yeah. Right. Stephen King is like, on writing is inspiring,
Yeah,
I think. Like
yeah,
you read that and you're like, all right, let's do this, let's go. And that's much more, yeah, that's what you need.
yeah,
I mean, I did not finish reading The War of Art, but there's an essence to it that's valuable. Like I like the idea of the resistance and like seeing things as resistance that don't need to be like that, like that you don't have to pay attention to. Like I have resistance to give you the draft. I should just send you the first draft. I'll send you the first draft. Like it's I've told you already, it's hot garbage. Like, but
yeah,
then you can decide, but you can read it or not, like
yeah, yeah.
um and like it's the resistance telling me like you shouldn't see it. Like I could let you see it. It'll probably be productive for me to be less precious about it.
Yeah, it's up to
Um
you.
but
But I'd be happy to read it. I mean, and actually, it's if it's that could serve me. If it's really bad, I could be like, hey, this guy wrote Sprint, and he can still write really bad science fiction. That's encouraging to me. Um, but cool. So yeah. So thanks so much. I mean, we're way, way, way over time, but I definitely would love to do this again. This was so much fun. Um,
Yeah, we'll do round two. We'll get to the questions.
awesome. And but if you want to say, where can people find you? Where can they find your poetry or your
Yeah.
whatever you have?
I would say the best things to go to jakeknapp.com, and you can find I have a newsletter there, and I have a podcast called Jake and Jonathan that you can look up. And that's probably the best. I'm really like not doing Twitter and stuff now, so don't even bother with
Don't
that.
even bother with Twitter.
Yeah,
The
but
newsletter is
yeah.
really good. And the website still has a lot of content, and the Sprint Book website also has some really
Oh
great
yeah,
content.
yeah, that's a good one too. The sprintbook.com if you want more sprint stuff. We're about to launch a new version of that, so
Cool.
any day now.
Cool.
And yeah, dude, thanks for having me on. It's super fun.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time, and have a great week. And I can't wait to, if you want to send me the draft, can't wait for it.
Okay, cool,
All right.
right on. You got it.
Thanks, man. Talk later.